Ethan had always been full of energy, the kind of boy who ran through the halls of his mansion laughing and playing, completely unaware of the pressures of the world around him. He was the only child of a billionaire, and his life was filled with every comfort money could buy. Yet, on this morning, something felt wrong. His face was pale, and he felt an unusual heaviness in his chest. His parents, who had always watched over him with love and attention, noticed immediately. The moment they saw Ethan struggle to breathe and clutch his stomach, panic filled the room. Their world, which had always revolved around control and power, suddenly felt helpless. The doctors were called in quickly, and within minutes, the cold, clinical urgency of the hospital took over. As Ethan lay on the hospital bed, machines beeping and lights glaring, he tried to stay calm, but fear crept in. He had never faced anything serious before, and this was terrifying. The doctor, a man in his 50s with kind eyes but a serious expression, approached the family. His words came slowly, each one hitting harder than the last. Ethan had a rare, aggressive condition, and the situation was critical. "There is a very small window, just 3 days," the doctor said. "We need to act fast, but even then, the chances are very low." The room fell silent, and Ethan's mother covered her mouth in shock. Her hands trembled as she held her son's, tears filling her eyes. For the first time, money and influence felt meaningless. The father's face, usually calm and commanding, turned pale. He clenched his fists, realizing that no amount of wealth could immediately fix what was happening. Ethan tried to understand, but the words, 3 days to survive, kept repeating in his mind. The concept of time suddenly became terrifying. Every second felt heavy, every moment counted. He wanted to cry, to run, to scream, but he only lay there, holding on to his mother's hand tightly. The doctors quickly began tests, running scans and taking blood. Each beep of the machines seemed louder than the last. The hospital room, usually filled with the quiet hum of order, was now tense and filled with worry. Nurses moved quickly, speaking in low, urgent tones. The family felt like spectators in a world they could not control. Ethan's father paced back and forth, trying to think of any solution. Doctors, specialists, treatments from around the world. It all flashed through his mind. But time was slipping away. He realized that no matter how many resources he had, some things could not be bought. Some battles were fought with courage, faith, and a little bit of luck. Meanwhile, Ethan's mind raced, thinking about his life, his friends, and all the things he still wanted to do. It seemed unfair that someone so young and full of life could be facing this, but somewhere deep inside, he felt a spark of hope, a small voice telling him not to give up. As the first hours passed, the family tried to stay positive, clinging to the idea that perhaps a miracle could happen. Doctors explained options, but each one carried risks. The uncertainty was almost unbearable. Each decision felt like life or death. The weight of the moment pressed down on everyone. Even though he was scared, Ethan looked at his father and mother and tried to reassure them. "I'll be okay," he whispered, his voice small but determined. His words were brave, though inside, he felt the fear gnawing at him. That simple statement, though, brought a flicker of hope to the room, reminding everyone that sometimes courage can shine brightest in the darkest moments. By the end of the day, Ethan had been through countless tests, and the diagnosis was clear. His body was fragile, and the clock was ticking, but something unspoken hung in the air, a sense that perhaps this story was not yet finished, that even in the face of impossible odds, unexpected heroes and miracles could appear. The family held on to each other, silently praying that the next 3 days would bring a chance, a way, a solution that no one could yet imagine. Ethan lay in bed, exhausted but alert, staring at the ceiling and thinking about what could happen. Fear and hope mingled inside him, creating a strange mixture that he could not fully understand. Yet, he refused to give in, refusing to surrender to despair. The days ahead would test everyone in unimaginable ways, but in this moment, he had made a quiet decision. He would fight, he would survive, and he would face whatever came next with courage. And so, the story began, not with victory, but with fear, uncertainty, and the fragile hope that something extraordinary could still happen. A life-threatening diagnosis had shaken the billionaire's world, but little did anyone know, the next moments would bring someone unexpected into Ethan's life, someone who might just change everything. The moment the diagnosis hit, Ethan's father, Mr. Caldwell, felt a weight he had never known before. In all his years of business, he had faced impossible deals, hostile takeovers, and financial disasters, but nothing compared to the helplessness he felt now. Money, power, and influence had always given him control, but here, in the sterile hospital room, control slipped through his fingers. He walked back and forth, each step echoing against the polished floor, his mind racing faster than his heart. Specialists, surgeons, experimental treatments, he could call anyone, fly anywhere, spend any amount of money, but the clock was relentless, ticking down the 3 days the doctors had given. He picked up his phone, dialing numbers he had never imagined calling, from the world's top doctors to secret researchers. Each call filled with urgency, yet each reply brought no guarantee, only hope and more uncertainty. Mrs. Caldwell sat beside Ethan, clutching his small hand, her fingers trembling. Tears ran silently down her cheeks as she whispered prayers, each one louder in her mind than the last. She looked at her husband, seeing the desperation etched into his face, realizing that his calm, commanding nature had finally been stripped away, leaving a man just as vulnerable as anyone else. Mr. Caldwell had spent his life solving problems with money, but this was different. He considered flying Ethan to the most advanced hospitals in Europe, ordering rare medicines, hiring specialists who were known to defy odds. Yet, even as he made these plans, a gnawing thought refused to leave him. What if all of it still wasn't enough? What if 3 days was all the time they had? He knelt beside Ethan's bed for the first time, ignoring the walls of wealth and authority that always separated them. Looking into his son's pale, frightened eyes, he felt something shift inside him. A part of him realized that no amount of money could replace courage, love, or determination, and that maybe, just maybe, the answer wouldn't come from doctors, machines, or laboratories, but from a completely unexpected place. Ethan tried to comfort his father, sensing the panic beneath the calm voice. "Dad, I'm scared," he whispered, yet his voice carried a quiet strength, a determination that surprised even him. "I know," Mr. Caldwell admitted, swallowing hard, "but I promise. I will not stop looking for a way to save you." The hours turned into an endless cycle of phone calls, consultations, and frantic research. Every second felt heavier than the last, every decision carried the weight of life and death. Mr. Caldwell pushed himself beyond exhaustion, fueled by the desperate hope that somewhere, someone had a solution that no one else could see. Meanwhile, Ethan's mother scoured the internet, forums, and medical journals, her eyes red from lack of sleep. But in all the data, all the statistics, there was only one truth: they were running out of time. Fear gripped her heart, but determination kept her going. She refused to give up, refusing to let despair claim her family. By late evening, Mr. Caldwell sat alone in the hospital lounge, staring blankly at the city skyline through the glass walls. The city sparkled with life, success, and wealth, but none of it mattered now. Each light, each skyscraper, each achievement seemed meaningless in comparison to the life of his son. He realized that the true measure of power was not money, but the ability to fight when all odds seemed impossible. Then, a thought flickered in his mind: unusual, risky, almost impossible. Maybe the solution would not come from a place of privilege, from all the wealth and fame he had accumulated. Maybe it would come from someone unexpected, someone ordinary, someone who could see possibilities that others could not. The idea seemed crazy, yet it gave him a tiny spark of hope, a thread he could cling to in the darkness. As night fell, Ethan's room was quiet except for the beeping of machines. Mr. Caldwell sat by his son's bedside, holding his hand tightly, silently promising that he would do everything, risk everything, and leave no stone unturned to save him. In that moment, he realized that desperation could sometimes awaken the most extraordinary courage, and that perhaps, the impossible was not impossible at all. The billionaire, who had conquered empires and shattered records, now faced a challenge far greater than anything money could solve, and though he did not yet know it, the next person to enter their lives, the street kid who seemed insignificant in the world's eyes, would change everything, setting the stage for a series of events no one could have imagined. The streets were a different world entirely, a place where survival didn't depend on money, status, or connections. It was raw, unpredictable, and unforgiving, and in the middle of it all lived Leo, a boy whose life had been shaped by hardship, not privilege. He knew hunger, fear, and cold better than anyone, yet he had a spark in his eyes that refused to be extinguished. Leo moved quickly through narrow alleyways, dodging traffic and avoiding the men who would have taken anything from him if they could. His life was a constant game of strategy, using wits, speed, and instincts honed from years of struggle. But despite the harshness around him, Leo had a kind heart, a curiosity about the world that made him notice things others ignored, things that would seem ordinary, but sometimes, ordinary things held extraordinary possibilities. On that particular evening, Leo was scavenging near a hospital he had never cared much about before. Something caught his attention, a boy being rushed inside, pale and fragile, accompanied by frantic adults. Leo paused, instinctively sensing that this was no ordinary emergency. Something about the urgency, the fear in the father's eyes, told him this situation was different. He watched from a distance, blending into the shadows, his mind working fast, thinking of ways he could help, though he had no idea what exactly needed doing. Leo had grown up solving impossible problems every day, and the challenge intrigued him. A strange feeling tugged at him, telling him that he could do something, maybe even something that seemed impossible. Meanwhile, inside the hospital, Ethan's family was still reeling from the diagnosis. The 3-day countdown hung over them like a storm cloud, but outside, Leo was preparing for his own kind of battle, one without rules, without authority, and without guarantees. He knew he had skills, insight, and courage that money could never buy. Leo slipped inside the hospital unnoticed, moving with the ease of someone invisible to the world. His eyes scanned the corridors, spotting medical staff rushing by, machines beeping in rhythm with the tension that filled the building. He had no plan, not yet, only a growing certainty that he could help. Somehow, against all odds, he was drawn to Ethan's room, as if fate itself had guided him there. When he first glimpsed Ethan lying in the hospital bed, hooked to monitors and tubes, Leo felt a strange mix of fear and determination. The boy looked fragile, almost like a delicate bird, yet there was a spark of life that refused to be extinguished. Leo knew he could not let it die, not on his watch. He studied the machines, the charts, and the frantic movements of the doctors, noticing patterns, small things no one else seemed to see. In the chaos, Leo's mind raced, connecting dots that others overlooked. He realized that the conventional solutions had failed to stop time, but maybe, just maybe, there was a way to tip the balance, a method no one else had considered. He approached cautiously, whispering to himself, "I can do this. I have to do this." His voice was quiet but firm, full of determination. The adults in the room did not notice him yet, absorbed as they were in medical procedures and panic. But Leo's presence was not a coincidence, and his instinct told him this was the moment he had been waiting for. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small notebook filled with sketches, calculations, and ideas he had collected over years of thinking outside the box. Some were inventions, some were clever shortcuts, all were proof of his ability to solve problems no one else dared to attempt. Leo flipped through the pages, seeking something, anything, that could help save Ethan. And then, in a quiet, extraordinary moment, he saw it, an idea, simple yet brilliant, something no one in the hospital had noticed, a small adjustment, a clever trick, that could change everything. Leo's eyes lit up with excitement and fear. He had never attempted anything like this before, but the urgency of Ethan's situation left no room for hesitation. At that moment, the story shifted, invisible threads weaving together wealth and poverty, despair and hope, privilege and courage. Leo, the street kid, ordinary in the eyes of the world, was about to do something extraordinary, something that would challenge expectations, defy logic, and ultimately, save a life. And so, the unlikely hero prepared to step out of the shadows, knowing that the next hours would decide everything, not just for Ethan, but for the world that had yet to understand the power of someone who refused to be ignored. Leo sat quietly on the edge of a chair in the empty corner of the hospital room, his notebook open, fingers tapping nervously on the pages. He had seen the boy, Ethan, fragile and barely holding on, and he knew time was running out. The doctors had done everything they could, yet the clock still ticked, counting down the 3 days, each second heavier than the last. He thought fast, connecting details others had ignored, noticing patterns in the machines, slight variations in the boy's breathing, tiny clues that no one else had noticed. Leo's life on the streets had taught him to see what others overlooked, to find solutions in chaos, and now, that skill was about to be tested in a way that mattered more than anything before. The plan formed in his mind, daring, unconventional, and risky. It was something no doctor would attempt, something no billionaire would approve, and yet it was the only way to give Ethan a chance. Leo scribbled diagrams, notes, and steps, his handwriting hurried but precise. Every detail mattered, every action could be the difference between life and death. He studied the equipment in the room, noticing that a small adjustment, a combination of timing, pressure, and rhythm, could help Ethan's body stabilize. It was almost impossible, a delicate balance that required courage, precision, and nerves of steel, but Leo felt a strange certainty, a confidence born from years of surviving impossible situations. Leo approached the monitors, whispering instructions to himself, his mind running faster than his fingers could write. He knew the doctors might not understand, might even stop him if they saw what he was attempting, but he had no choice. Hesitation was a luxury Ethan could not afford, every second mattered, and failure was not an option. He thought of Ethan's face, pale and scared, and a fire ignited in him. This was bigger than any game, bigger than any trick he had pulled on the streets. This was life itself, and for the first time, Leo felt the weight of responsibility crushing and exhilarating at the same time. He took a deep breath, steadying himself, reminding himself that the impossible was only impossible until someone dared to try. Step by step, he put the plan into motion, adjusting machines, timing doses, and making calculations that no one else had dared attempt. His movements were deliberate, careful, but urgent. Each adjustment brought small signs of hope, a slight stabilization in Ethan's breathing, a flicker of color returning to his cheeks. It was working, but only just, and there was no room for error. Meanwhile, Ethan's parents noticed subtle changes, though they could not yet understand what was happening. The monitors that had been a constant source of fear now showed tiny signs of improvement. Hope flickered in their eyes, though they had no idea who or what was causing it. Leo's daring plan remained hidden, invisible yet powerful, working silently against the odds. As the hours passed, Leo's confidence grew, but so did the danger. One wrong move, one miscalculation, and Ethan could worsen instead of improve. The stakes were terrifying, yet exhilarating, every heartbeat a reminder that extraordinary courage often appears in the most ordinary people. He felt a strange connection to the boy, as if their lives were intertwined by fate, and that connection gave him strength. By midnight, the impossible plan was fully in motion, the delicate adjustments holding Ethan steady. The street kid, unnoticed by the world of wealth and authority, had taken control in a way no one else could. He worked quietly, with precision, determination, and a growing sense of purpose, knowing that every small success was a victory against despair. Leo paused for a moment, looking at Ethan, and whispered, "I've got you, you're not alone." The words were simple, but they carried the weight of a promise, a vow to fight the impossible with everything he had. The boy on the hospital bed did not yet know who his savior was, but the story had begun to change, and the next few hours would decide whether courage could truly defy the odds. And so, in the quiet chaos of the hospital, the impossible plan continued, daring, brilliant, and terrifying, weaving together hope, skill, and courage. A street kid, with nothing to lose and everything to prove, was about to challenge fate itself, setting the stage for a miracle that no one could have predicted. The night stretched long and heavy over the hospital, each tick of the clock echoing like a countdown in Ethan's fragile world. Leo had been working for hours, his plan in motion, but the struggle was far from over. Every adjustment, every tiny calculation brought relief for a moment, only to be replaced by new obstacles. The impossible was never easy, and tonight was proving that in ways even Leo hadn't imagined. The first challenge came in the form of skepticism. The doctors, brilliant and experienced, noticed small deviations in the machines, changes they didn't authorize, and they began asking questions. "Who is making these adjustments?" one nurse demanded, her voice sharp, urgent. "The readings are fluctuating," a doctor added, scanning the monitors with concern. Leo ducked into the shadows, heart racing, hiding in plain sight. His mind worked fast. If he revealed himself, the plan could be stopped, and Ethan would lose the chance he had fought for. Then came the physical strain. Leo had been crouched, stretching, adjusting, running calculations on the fly, but fatigue was creeping in. His arms ached, his head throbbed, and hunger gnawed at his stomach, yet he forced himself to stay focused. Every second counted, and the boy's life depended on his endurance. Leo gritted his teeth, pushing through exhaustion, reminding himself that survival often demanded more than comfort. It demanded courage and determination. The most terrifying struggle, however, was the uncertainty. Even with the plan in motion, every heartbeat was a gamble. Ethan's body was fragile, reacting unpredictably, sometimes improving, sometimes slipping dangerously. The monitors beeped faster, warning of instability, and Leo's stomach churned with worry, but he refused to panic. Panic was the enemy of precision, and tonight, precision was all that mattered. Meanwhile, Ethan's father paced outside the room, unaware of the young hero working silently. He had tried everything he could, yet nothing had stabilized his son. Frustration gnawed at him, a bitter reminder that control was an illusion. The doctors looked exhausted, their confidence shaken by the stubbornness of the disease, yet none of them could see the quiet force reshaping the odds in the shadows. Hours passed, and Leo faced technical challenges he had not anticipated. A machine's calibration was off by a fraction, requiring him to improvise a delicate solution. He balanced logic and intuition, using skills he had honed from years of navigating impossible situations on the streets. Each correction brought small victories, a slight rise in Ethan's heartbeat, a steadier breathing pattern, but each came with the constant threat of failure. At one point, the hospital's power flickered, the monitors flashing and warning, and Leo's heart leaped. This could ruin everything, but he acted instantly, stabilizing the equipment, rerouting circuits in a way that even some trained professionals might not have imagined. His hands worked with precision and speed, sweat beading on his forehead, determination fueling every movement. Amid all this, the emotional struggle weighed heavily on Leo. He felt the gravity of the life in his hands, the fear of failing, the hope of saving a boy who had done nothing but deserve a chance at life. It was a burden, but also a fire, igniting a courage he had never known he possessed. The night was long, and the struggle unrelenting, yet Leo refused to step back, refused to surrender. As dawn approached, small signs of progress appeared. Ethan's breathing stabilized slightly, the color returning to his cheeks in soft, almost imperceptible waves. Leo allowed himself a brief moment of relief, though he knew the battle was far from over. Every second was still a challenge, every choice could change the outcome. In that quiet, tense morning light, the hospital room seemed to hum with unspoken tension. The struggle was not just physical or technical, but emotional, moral, and intellectual. Leo was testing the limits of what a single person could do when pushed by necessity, inspired by hope, and driven by courage. By the time the first rays of sunlight filtered through the blinds, Leo had survived the night's struggle, and Ethan had survived it too, though barely. The impossible had been resisted, step by step, calculation by calculation, a delicate dance between life and death. The battle was far from over, but the first victory had been claimed, and the world was about to witness the extraordinary. The morning light streamed softly through the hospital window, painting the room in pale gold, and for the first time since the diagnosis, a fragile sense of hope began to stir. Leo had been at Ethan's side through the night, guiding, adjusting, calculating, and now, something extraordinary was happening. Small signs of life began to grow stronger, like sparks of fire in the darkness. Ethan's breathing, which had been shallow and erratic, started to deepen, steadier than it had been in hours. His color returned slowly, his hands no longer cold and clammy, and for the first time, the monitors seemed to hum a quieter, more rhythmic song. Leo watched with wide eyes, his heart pounding, knowing that every tiny improvement was the result of his impossible plan, and yet, still so delicate that one mistake could undo it all. The doctors entered the room, their faces a mix of surprise and curiosity. They noticed the subtle improvement and immediately began checking charts, comparing readings, and discussing possibilities. "This is unusual," one whispered. "The vitals are stabilizing beyond expectations." The skeptical glances that had filled the room yesterday were replaced with a flicker of wonder, though none could yet understand why or how this change had occurred. Leo stayed in the shadows, observing quietly, making small, precise adjustments whenever needed. He didn't need recognition, didn't need praise. All that mattered was that Ethan had a chance to survive. He had seen despair in the eyes of the boy's family, the fear that life might slip away, and that fear had driven him with a determination stronger than anything he had ever known. Ethan, still too weak to speak, felt the change in his body, the weight of weakness slowly lifting, and he sensed a presence he couldn't explain, a quiet energy that seemed to guide him back from the edge. Though he couldn't see Leo clearly, he felt gratitude, hope, and an instinctive trust in the unseen force helping him breathe, survive, live. The turning point came suddenly, unexpectedly. yet perfectly timed. Leo realized that one final, delicate adjustment, a small change in timing and dosage, could synchronize everything, balance the fragile rhythms of Ethan's body. He hesitated for only a heartbeat, knowing that hesitation could cost precious time, and then acted, hands steady, mind focused, heart pounding. Immediately, the effect was noticeable. The monitors displayed a consistent rhythm, the boy's color brightened, his pulse strengthened, and the air in the room seemed lighter, almost as if the weight of impending tragedy had lifted slightly. Mr. Caldwell, who had been pacing anxiously, noticed the change, and his breath caught, a mixture of shock, relief, and disbelief flooding him. "Is this possible?" one doctor murmured, examining the numbers. The word miracle hung unspoken in the air, because that was exactly what it felt like. The impossible had shifted into the possible, a balance achieved not by money, technology, or conventional expertise, but by intuition, courage, and brilliance from someone the world had overlooked. Leo allowed himself a small, quiet smile. Though exhaustion weighed heavily on him, he had faced the night's struggle, the skepticism of others, the constant fear of failure, and yet, through it all, he had created the turning point, that delicate moment where hope finally began to outweigh despair. The boy's life, once slipping like sand through fingers, was now holding fast, grasped firmly by courage and ingenuity. Ethan's mother, tears streaming down her cheeks, leaned over his bed, holding his hand as if afraid to let go. Thank you for giving him a chance," she whispered, her voice trembling, unaware that the hero was hidden, a street kid who had walked silently into their lives, changing everything. The world of wealth, influence, and privilege had been powerless, but the invisible courage of one ordinary boy had shifted destiny. By mid-morning, the room had changed entirely, the air lighter, calmer, filled with cautious optimism. The turning point had arrived, the impossible had begun to bend, and the story, which had started in fear and despair, now carried the first true note of hope. Leo watched silently, knowing that the next steps would be just as critical, yet for the first time, he allowed himself to believe that victory, however fragile, was within reach. And so, the moment of the turning point passed, quiet but extraordinary, invisible to most, yet monumental in its consequences. The battle was far from over, but for the first time, life had begun to fight back, guided by the courage of a street kid who refused to give up, and the impossible began to seem just a little less impossible. The sun had climbed higher in the sky, spilling golden light through the hospital windows, and for the first time in 3 days, there was a sense of calm that felt almost surreal. Ethan, once pale and weak, now stirred in his bed, eyes fluttering open, his breaths deeper, steadier, and warmer than they had been, a miracle, so sudden, so complete, that it left even the most experienced doctor speechless. His parents, exhausted from hours of fear and sleepless nights, rushed to his side, their hands trembling as they held his, tears streaming freely. His mother's voice broke with relief. "Ethan, you're alive. You made it." Mr. Caldwell, whose world had been consumed by panic and desperation, finally sank into a chair, overwhelmed by gratitude and disbelief. The boy who had seemed so fragile now radiated life, and for a moment, the entire room held its breath in quiet wonder. No one yet knew the full story. No one could understand how this fragile boy had been saved from the edge of death. The doctors checked and rechecked charts, scans, and vitals, each result confirming what they could hardly believe. The numbers were steady, stable, and improving. The impossible had happened, and yet no explanation fully satisfied the adults in the room. Meanwhile, Leo sat quietly in the corner, his hoodie pulled low over his face, blending into the background, unnoticed by anyone but fully aware of the magnitude of what had just occurred. He had taken risks no one would dare, worked in silence while others doubted, and now, the miracle had been realized. All the skills, all the courage, all the instincts he had sharpened on the streets had coalesced into a single, extraordinary act that saved a life. Ethan, still too weak to fully comprehend, felt a warmth, a strange comfort, as if someone unseen had been with him, guiding his breaths, steadying his heart. He smiled faintly, a small, innocent expression that carried all the hope and joy of survival. The boy's first words were soft, hesitant, but filled with life. I feel better," and that tiny phrase seemed to echo louder than any celebration could. The miracle wasn't just in survival, it was in timing, in courage, in the quiet brilliance that had acted when everything else seemed powerless, Mr. Caldwell finally noticed Leo's shadowed presence, a feeling of intuition striking him. "Wait, who's been here?" he asked, eyes scanning the room, and for the first time, he realized that someone had intervened in ways no one could have predicted. Leo stepped forward slowly, reluctant to take credit, but unable to hide entirely. His voice was quiet but steady. I just did what I could," he said, eyes locked on Ethan, who now seemed more alive than he had in days. There was no arrogance, no boast, only the quiet pride of someone who had faced impossible odds and refused to back down. The parents stared in disbelief, their initial shock giving way to gratitude. "You saved him?" Ethan's father asked, his voice choked, unable to mask emotion. Leo nodded simply. "I didn't have a choice. I just had to try." And in that moment, the true power of courage and selflessness became clear. The boy who had nothing in the world had given everything to save someone who had everything, yet life itself had hung in the balance. Word of Ethan's recovery spread quietly through the hospital, the miraculous story of survival growing with each whispered retelling. Doctors began to piece together what had happened, realizing that conventional methods alone could not have achieved such a result. The miracle had been the product of ingenuity, bravery, and determination, a reminder that heroes often come from the most unexpected places. By evening, Ethan was sitting up slightly, smiling at the room, his parents holding his hands as if never letting go. Leo remained nearby, content to watch from the shadows, satisfied that the impossible had been achieved. The miracle had changed lives, not just Ethan's, but everyone in the room, showing that courage, love, and determination can rewrite fate itself. And so, the story of the billionaire's son and the street kid reached its extraordinary turning point, a tale of hope, resilience, and selfless courage, proving that even in the face of death and despair, miracles can happen when the unexpected hero steps forward, unseen, unheralded, but unstoppable. The hospital room was quiet now, but the air carried a new energy, a mix of relief, gratitude, and awe. Ethan, once so fragile and on the edge of death, now sat upright in his bed, smiling faintly, his eyes brighter than they had been in days. His parents, exhausted but overjoyed, held him close, their hearts still racing from the events of the last 72 hours. Mr. Caldwell, a man used to controlling everything with wealth and power, sat back and finally allowed himself to feel a different kind of wonder. The miracle had not come from money, machines, or the world's best doctors, but from the courage, intelligence, and selflessness of a street kid no one had even noticed. It was a lesson he would never forget, a truth money could never buy. Leo, still quietly in the background, avoided the spotlight, watching the family with a humble satisfaction. He had done what he came to do, risking everything to save a life, and now the boy before him was alive, breathing, smiling, full of possibilities. The street kid, often overlooked and underestimated, had changed the course of someone's life forever, and that knowledge filled him with a quiet pride. Ethan, still weak but curious, finally asked, "Who helped me?" His small voice trembled with awe and confusion. Leo stepped forward hesitantly. "I did what I could," he said softly, eyes meeting the boys. "I just wanted to make sure you had a chance." Ethan's parents looked between them, shock and gratitude filling their faces. They realized that life's greatest miracles sometimes come from the most unexpected people. Over the next hours, conversations unfolded, full of wonder and reflection. The Caldwells listened as Leo explained, in simple terms, how he had noticed subtle signs and made careful adjustments to help Ethan. The story sounded impossible, almost like something out of a movie, yet the results were real, undeniable, and life-changing. The lesson for Mr. Caldwell was profound, life-altering even. He realized that money, status, and influence were powerful, but they could never replace courage, empathy, and ingenuity. True power, he understood now, came not from what you owned, but from what you did when the world seemed impossible. When someone else's life hung in the balance, what you were willing to risk mattered more than anything else. Ethan, still weak but recovering, held Leo's hand, a silent understanding passing between them. The street kid who had saved him was not just a hero, but a reminder that bravery does not depend on wealth, that greatness can emerge from the most unlikely places. They formed a bond that no money, privilege, or circumstance could ever sever, a bond born from trust, courage, and a shared brush with the impossible. Word of Leo's heroic act spread quietly through the hospital. then beyond, the doctors, nurses, and staff who had doubted or overlooked him now saw the power of determination and intelligence in action. The street kid had reminded everyone that the human spirit, when pushed to its limits, could achieve miracles. In the days that followed, Ethan regained strength, learning to walk, talk, and laugh again. Each small step was a reminder of the life that had been saved, each smile was a celebration of courage and hope. The billionaire's family, forever changed, began to see the world differently, valuing human resilience over material wealth, kindness over influence, and courage over convenience. Leo, though still living in his own challenging world, carried a quiet confidence with him, knowing he had made a difference that could never be erased. His life, too, had changed. The boy who once struggled unseen now had a story of impact, recognition, and the knowledge that even the smallest, seemingly ordinary person could do something extraordinary. And so, the story of the billionaire's son and the street kid reached its powerful conclusion, a tale of survival, courage, and the extraordinary potential hidden in ordinary people. The lessons were clear. Hope can appear in the darkest moments, heroes can come from the most unexpected places, and when someone refuses to give up, miracles are possible. The impossible, it seemed, was just waiting for someone brave enough to try.